that race has helped to define precisely who we consider humans, not quite humans and non-humans, thereby impacting on and shaping much of the contents of what we today consider to be the human sciences canon. Very much what we've thought about as liberal humanism. But where Lear defines racializing assemblages as the ongoing sets of political relations that require, through constant perpetuation via institutions, discourses, practices, desires, infrastructures, languages, technologies, science, economies, all of these things, the barring of non-white subjects from the category of human as it is performed in the modern West. Of course, he's making the point that these assemblages are relational in their articulation and become constitutive precisely in this relation between separate components as they coalesce. He's of course referencing the work of people like Giorgio Agamben and his work on bare life, Michel Foucault's work on the dispositif and biopolitics, and of course Achille Mbembe's work on necropolitics, and then Deleuze and Guattari's idea of assemblages. But he takes issue with their conception of race in relation to how we come to consider who is human, not quite human, and non-human today. What he takes issue with specifically are the ideas that they all take as their point of departure. The idea that who is considered human or non-human is defined by relations of power, by systems of power that we're either inside or outside. So if you're inside it, you're human. If you're outside of it, you're non-human. Yeah? Race finds fertile ground on which to land, and then becomes an exemplar of how the idea of human and non-human are played out. So in other words, race is an example of how you can either then become human or non-human. But he inverts this and suggests that race has been central to defining the modern conception of what it means to be human, and so sees racializing assemblages not as a biological or cultural classification, but as a set of sociological processes that discipline humanity into humans, not quite humans and non-humans, right from the onset of modernity itself. Stated differently then, race is not a biological category that is politically charged, but is a political category that is disguised as a biological one. His argument essentially suggests that it is in the sheer scale of colonial expansionism and the modernist project that for the first time we start to see the emergence of global configurations that are based on the violence of race that then determines who is considered human and non-human in modern Western liberal thought. So for example, Agamben and Foucault reference the Holocaust as and the atrocities committed by the likes of Joseph Mengele in Auschwitz as a racialized form of biopolitics or bare life, where Lear provides historical analysis to illustrate that in fact these acts had their precursors in the colonial experimentation on indigenous populations in German colonial Africa, reinforcing the implication of race and definitions of who is human and non-human. Now this is quite an audacious argument and has two consequences for us. The first is that if the genre of human and non-human that characterize our thinking today can be approached differently, especially if we pivot and speak from the perspective of those who are considered non-human, then perhaps we can start to rethink what the very idea of human means and challenge the very nature of the race binaries of our world today. How could we conceptualize being human if we ask the question from the vantage point of those who have been excluded from this domain of human? When, for example, we study black subjects, we often try to reassert their humanity. But is there potential for a new imaginary of what the human may look like outside of this liberal conception of man or woman? The second consequence is very much aligned to the current decolonial moment, which also calls for adopting a skeptical epistemic attitude towards Western modernity and its associated forms of knowledge, power, being, and praxis. If a central tenet of decolonial thinking is also to pursue modes of epistemic justice, then the recovery of subordinated knowledges must be a pivotal act in which we seek to expand the archive and challenge the colonial and imperial canon excuse me, through the pursuit of the archival slivers that expose us to alternative imaginaries. Already, we see these possibilities in epistemes that are not attempting a recuperative idealism about what a black subject would have looked like if it was uninterrupted by coloniality, but are foregrounding new African feminisms that have ruptured from strands of black feminism in the USA, embodied politics that I've referred to earlier on that are both real and metonymic, new organic social movements, standpoint approaches to life and death in the quotidian, etc., etc. So I'm going to end here and just grab a quote from another paper and perhaps say that as we stand on the precipice, poised to step into a despairing abyss, we are also confronted with the promise of new vistas on our horizon. For those of us who constantly think about bending the curve of the model universe towards the ideals of emancipation, egalitarianism, and collective well-being, we will have to avoid recoiling into nihilism and fatalism and seriously recover meaningful histories and begin crafting new forms of critical humanism. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So we'll take a couple questions. Any hands? Sure.
Professor Stevens, thank you so much for your presentation. Before, Professor Melissa mentioned that she has been to Brazil and then told us about what's going on there in terms of race. And after we had the lecture saying that reverse racism is whatever or however it's signified, is a demand for healing. So, and then you mentioned race melancholia, right? So now my question is how this concept of melancholy can be or cannot be applied to reverse racism, which has been a very used value concept nowadays, because we have a candidate that is just like a South American version of a certain president in a certain country that puts children into cages. So this idea of xenophobia and misogyny and racism and homophobia, all of those values have been brought again. This, you know, it's part of this recrudescence movement that is going on around the globe. So how this concept of race melancholy and race repetition can be or cannot be related to reverse racism or whatever this is.
Okay. Should we take a couple of questions? Okay.
Sure. Yeah, it gives me some time to think. This is just a technique to get us to buy some time. Yeah? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, you talk about the issue of Trump's victory being a shock. I particularly want to talk about the issue of the right to self-determination. Vis-a-vis the issue of globalization. Don't you think it's problematic that when people choose for themselves, particularly in terms of my understanding of democracy, when people self-determine and when people choose to take a particular direction, and when this direction is not in line with the global agenda, the world reacts and people are called names because of the decisions that they're taking and the decisions that they're making. Don't you think that it's problematic? And what does this whole issue of talking about the issue of populism or people talking about popular politics, isn't popular politics based on the truth and on understanding what the discourse amongst the people is, and then being relevant to it? I know we in this particular spaces will say that they don't know what is right for them. I'm just want to question that in terms of globalization versus the right to self-determination. Yeah, I have another one, maybe I'll come back. Sure.
Thanks. Shall I take? Okay.
Thank you, Prof. The fact that racism is still so stubborn in the 21st century, after so many centuries of the Enlightenment, the so-called Enlightenment, just shows that human beings are not different from animals. We are like animals living in jungles, So we have lions living among themselves, and antelopes among themselves, and we are warring against each other, and the mighty ones devouring the weak ones. So now, in your capacity as a psychologist, as I can read it here,
You can't hold that against me.
yeah, I know that psychology, especially psychoanalysis, is a great component of critical theory. How do you find a way of exercising the beast within ourselves in order to fully emancipate ourselves as human beings beyond animality? Did psychoanalysis find a way? Okay, if not, do you think really, Prof, that spirituality is the answer? And I ask it just because, as I asked the last question, because I know that spirituality is rejected in the academia right now because of empiricism. We have to have proof, facts, spirituality, voodoo, these things are not material facts, so we cannot accept them, these theories in academia. So do you think, Prof, that spirituality is the way forward? Thank you.
Thanks.
Do you mind if we just take the one last question?
Okay.
Back here.
First, let me start by saying
So maybe just 4, eh? Right now.
First, let me start by saying that by membership, theory and practice, I belong to the intellectual force of the ruling party. But from your address, Prof, you alluded to EFF and to BLF as thriving on populist entrepreneurship. They're implying that they are nowhere near decolonial political discourse of the land. And I would like you to throw more light on that, and maybe for purpose of clarity on my part, would you then attribute their political antics to the programs of the fascist Italy and Nazi Germany of the 1930s?
So let me start with that, because that seems like a great place to start.